In the last video, we were thinking about design, about planning the workshop, designing the learning experience. And I finished off by saying that that could all be lost. You could have the best design in the world. But if your presence in the room doesn't build the rapport with the participants so that they're in a position where they're motivated to learn, then all the design is going to be lost. And that's why I think there's a very close link between design and dynamics. And it's all very well taking a design for a workshop off the shelf, taking one off the internet. But if it's not your design, if it's not something that you can live and breathe, that you own, it's very difficult to take ownership of it and deliver it then in the classroom or in the workshop with the participants. The room, how you are in the room, is everything. From building rapport at the very outset to the whole atmosphere in the room, the way you greet people with a smile and a handshake, every individual if you get the opportunity, the words that you use, but we also know crucially the body language and the tone that you use. So at the outset I could say, hi, I'm Phil Wason and I'm your facilitator for today. Or I could say, hello, my name's Phil Wason and I'm your facilitator for today. Or I could say, hi, my name's Phil Wason and I'm your facilitator for today. Now all three of those used exactly the same words, but the tone was different and the body language was different. And they're all cringeworthy and none of them are going to get you off onto a good footing. And all I would say is, I mentioned being genuinely inquisitive in the last video. I would encourage you to be that, but I would encourage you to be genuinely authentic. Just be yourself. I think you can adapt to the group of people you're with. Are they frontline workers or are they executives? You adapt according to who you're with. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Your language might be slightly different, but you're still you. You're still your own authentic self. At the outset of the workshop, in order to help with the dynamics, you need to clarify why you're there. And it's sometimes worth showing on the screen or on a flip chart or speaking out the agreed objectives, the objectives that were set with your client, who may be in the room, or they may not be, they may be absent. These are the objectives of today. This is what we're hoping to achieve today. Does that ring with what you're expecting for today? Is what you're expecting anything like that? Because often it isn't. People are often just told, oh, you're on that workshop tomorrow, it's called this, and they're not even given any joining instructions or any objectives for the day. What can they expect from today? Why are they here? Because it's not always obvious. The other thing I want to mention about early on when people first come into the room is the room layout. Not just the atmosphere in terms of temperature and the tone that you set, but physically, what's the room like? Now, you may have to make do with something that's not very salubrious. It's not a hotel. I've been in some depots where you're basically in a porter cabin. And I've also been in some very luxurious surroundings. But whatever, the layout of the room is crucial and it needs to fit the objectives and the purpose and the process that you're going to follow. Very often when you go to a room, you are often faced with a boardroom style, i.e. a long table with chairs all around it. And that's perfectly okay if you've got a business meeting, if you've got decision making. People have papers, a little bit like, the Prime Minister and their cabinet. But it's not great for an interactive workshop when you want people to move around and form into small groups and for there to be a more informal atmosphere. Or you might get to a room and it's completely blank. At least you've got an opportunity of a blank canvas and something to work with then. But I would suggest that you get there early, the day before if possible, or specify if there's someone who's going to help you with this, to arrange the room in the way in which you want. I generally would ask for cabaret style, where you have 3 or 4 or more, depending on the numbers of people, tables with about 4 chairs around it. You've got your ready-made groups. You can mix people up for different discussions so they get a different experience and different voices, different perspectives, but at least you've got the layout. Even if you don't have tables, you can sit people in those clusters, in those rooms, in those groups rather, around the room. So think about cabaret style. Some people, if it's a bit more formal training, you might have a bit of a horseshoe. And if it's just a discussion with a small group of people, you might decide just to join them in a circle. Where you're still facilitating, but you're one of them, and you know the numbers don't require small groups because it's just one small group, and you're just having a day-long conversation. In fact, whatever the group, I often say, look, today it's just a day-long conversation. That's what we're going to be having. I have a role, and you have a role, and I'll come to that in a moment. But it's not going to be me doing all the work. You're here to do the work. There's a clue in the name. Workshop. It's not a seminar where I'm giving a speech and then there's some Q&A or follow-up. So anyway, the room layout is very important, as well as the atmosphere, the temperature, the light, and so on. You will need somewhere to put your projector and laptop if you're going to be projecting. You will need a flip chart if you want to be a bit more dynamic and have some interaction around what they're giving you by way of feedback. Another aspect of the dynamic of the workshop are the ground rules. Now, this is a bit of a moving feast because if you're together for 2 days or 3 days or longer, you might want to spend quite a bit of time on ground rules. You're going to spend a lot of time with one another. You're going to have opportunity to get over the forming and polite stage of a group into the storming where people get on one another's nerves, and you're going to have people who get bored or frustrated or angry. And so you need to explore ground rules a little bit more for a longer period of time. If it's just a day, then I would still feature ground rules in the early stages, but you can really take too long over it if you just leave a blank sheet of paper and say, what do you want to be the ground rules? I'd do that if we've got 3 or 4 days together, but not if we've only got one, because it could take up half your morning if you're not careful. Neither do I want to just give it to them like on tablets of stone, passed down from me, these are the ground rules you will abide by, because they have no ownership. I want them to be their ground rules. So I would generally start with 1 or 2 and say they're good, standard generic ground rules. Let's try and keep to time. Let's try and respect one another's points of view, that kind of thing. Anything else you think is important. And the group will know themselves what they need to keep to if they're used to working with one another, the kind of things that crop up. Sometimes with ground rules, it's worth mentioning the Chatham House rule. There is only one. It's not the Chatham House rules. It's just what's said in the room stays in the room. And this is quite useful if you're having and you need a certain amount of confidentiality in the dynamic. The Chatham House rule basically says, because I know that anything that's said in here is not going to go any further, it gives me confidence to speak openly and honestly. It gives me motivation to be transparent with one another. And when I say it's not going to go any further, we may say, well, we discussed issue X, Y, and Z. That's okay. It's not a secret society, but it's confidential in the sense that we don't name names and we don't talk about Jim who let someone down or stuck his knife in someone's back. We don't go into that kind of detail about people and places. So the Chatham House rule can be very useful, but you do need to get everyone's buy-in to that so that they're committed to keeping it. I would usually say, look, I see this as my role. I'm not the fount of all knowledge here. You are. You've got a lot of experience between you. My role is really to guide. I may need to mediate. I may need to challenge you from time to time. I'm going to manage the day. I'm going to facilitate the event. I'm going to help us to keep time. And if we go off down a rabbit hole, or if we go off down a cul-de-sac, it's my job to try and bring us back, and I'll be keeping an eye on that. You can trust me with that. That's my role. Your role today, everyone, is to contribute, is to take part, is to be a participant. And that means being willing to share your experiences and your perspective, which you have a right to share. But I also want you to listen to other members of the group who may have a different perspective and to respect that. We want a culture of honour in this room, and that's going to help your learning because there's multiple partial views in the room. And so I want you to listen in order to understand, not listen in order to catch out. We'll talk about that more in another workshop. So basically, I'm there to control the thing. And that's not control in a domineering, controlling way. It's to control the flow, to control the process, because if I don't, someone else will, or no one else will, and we'll just be wading through treacle. I usually describe the day. I say, look, this is going to be a day which is a serious topic, but we're still going to have some fun. We're not going to, be deadly serious about all this or very solemn. Sometimes I'll be doing a workshop on safety culture, and I say, look, this is about safety, but actually it's about you. It's about you and your personality and your character and how you respond, what triggers you, how you look at your organization and so on. I'll say, this is a day when it's serious stuff, but there's no test. You're not going to be examined on it at the end of the day. If you leave thinking more about this, then job done. So I usually explain what the purpose of the day, the feel of the day, what it's going to be like. So that's something about the dynamics of the day. As we go into other videos, we'll probably have several on delivery. We'll talk about how we actually work with small groups, how we get people to feed back, how we have spokespersons, and all of that kind of thing. But the thing about the dynamic is it's not all about you, but you need to have self-awareness. So you need to know, you need to be there with some authority. I'm not here because I'm an expert in the topic necessarily, although you may be, but I'm here because my authority comes from facilitating the day, and I'm going to be the manager of the day. I also need to be aware that I have a presence in the room for good or for ill. I know that when I go in that room, the atmosphere will change. I can affect the atmosphere simply by the way I am. But I also know that I want there to be an impact. I want there to be an outcome from this day. And I want to keep moving these people on, challenging them, coaching them to come to some conclusions about what they're going to do differently. Authority, presence, and impact. They're the things I need to be self-aware of in myself and encourage people to be equally so for themselves. There's all kinds of potential hazards, all kinds of difficulties that we'll deal with in future videos. So I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye-bye.